What if World War I ended, but with no Treaty of Versailles? No guilt clause, no reparations, no humiliation for Germany. Would we have stopped Hitler before he rose to power? Would Europe have escaped a Second World War? Or would something even worse have emerged from the chaos? Let's find out. Chapter 1: A Different End to the Great War. The year is 1919. After 4 years of brutal trench warfare, millions of lives lost, and an entire continent reshaped by destruction, the world is finally ready for peace. But what if, instead of the Treaty of Versailles, the victorious Allied powers had failed to agree on the terms, or decided on a more lenient path? Historically, the Treaty of Versailles placed nearly full blame for World War I on Germany. It imposed crushing war reparations, dismantled German military strength, and stripped the country of valuable territory. The treaty humiliated Germany and sowed the seeds of resentment that Hitler would later exploit. But in this alternate timeline, the Big Four, Britain, France, the United States, and Italy, never reached a consensus. Disagreements over punishment, borders, and colonial spoils spiral into a diplomatic deadlock. President Woodrow Wilson's idealistic vision for peace and cooperation loses steam. Instead of Versailles, the war ends in a simple ceasefire, an armistice that remains unofficial and fragile. No war guilt clause, no reparations, no formal peace. Germany, though defeated, doesn't feel crushed. The Weimar Republic still forms, but without the weight of economic disaster looming over it. The German economy begins its slow recovery, helped by American loans and fewer international constraints. And most importantly, there is no national humiliation narrative, no stabbed in the back myth. German soldiers return home angry, but not ashamed. The story they tell is of an inconclusive war, not a total loss. Extremist voices still exist, but they remain on the margins. This opens up a radically different interwar period. Without the treaty's bitter legacy, politics across Europe begin to shift in unfamiliar ways. Chapter 2: No Hitler, no Nazis, but something else? One of the most direct effects of the Treaty of Versailles was Adolf Hitler's rise to power. The Nazi Party fed off national humiliation, economic depression, and the desire for revenge. Without the treaty's crushing terms, would Hitler have faded into obscurity? Quite possibly. In this alternate history, Adolf Hitler remains a frustrated veteran, painting watercolors and ranting in beer halls, but he never finds a mass audience. The NSDAP still forms, but with no widespread resentment to tap into, it gains little traction. Germany experiences hardship, but not catastrophe. Democracy, while fragile, survives. But that doesn't mean peace is guaranteed. Other ideologies begin to fill the void. Communist groups gain influence, especially as Russia stabilizes under Lenin, and later Stalin. The fear of Bolshevik revolution grows among European elites. In Germany, moderate socialist coalitions form the government, working to balance industry and workers' rights. Tensions flare, but don't boil over. Meanwhile, France and Britain, lacking a formal treaty, remain in a state of uneasy truce with Germany. They maintain their wartime alliances, but disagree on how to handle Germany's rearming. The absence of Versailles has left legal ambiguity. Is Germany allowed to build tanks, planes, submarines? Who decides? This unclear post-war structure means smaller powers, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, don't get strong international guarantees. Eastern Europe becomes a playground for influence and conflict, particularly between Germany and the Soviet Union. And in Italy, fascism still rises under Mussolini, albeit with a different tone. Without the triumph of Versailles to claim as an Allied victory, Italy feels even more shortchanged. Mussolini's rhetoric turns toward building a Mediterranean empire, clashing more directly with Britain and France than with Germany. So yes, no Hitler. But fascism, communism, and nationalism still rise in new and dangerous forms. The world avoids a Hitler-led World War II, but it may be heading towards an even messier, multipolar conflict. Chapter 3: A Delayed but Deadlier Second War. By the early 1930s, Europe is simmering. Germany, free from Versailles restrictions, rebuilds its military under the radar, slowly, quietly. There's no Allied commission monitoring their weapons, no demilitarized Rhineland, no occupation of the Saar. Though still economically bruised, Germany begins to recover industrially. Britain, suffering through its own post-war recession and international debates over empire, begins to retreat from European leadership. France, still fearful of German strength, fortifies its border but remains diplomatically isolated. Meanwhile, the United States, without the League of Nations to anchor it, fully retreats into isolationism. The Soviet Union, under Stalin, consolidates power and eyes expansion in the Baltics and Eastern Europe. Communist revolutions flare in nearby states. The ideological battle intensifies, not between fascism and liberalism, but between socialism and capitalism. In Asia, Japan continues its imperial ambitions in China, unchecked by any global institution. Without Versailles, Japan is never forced to play by international rules. The Manchurian incident of 1931 plays out similarly, but with even less global resistance. The spark for the next World War doesn't come from Nazi Germany invading Poland. Instead, it may erupt in the Balkans, the Baltics, or even colonial Africa, where European powers continue to jostle for control, often ignoring local unrest and rising calls for independence. This delayed war might begin in 1938, or 1942, or 1945, but when it comes, it is less centralized. Not one Axis versus one Allies, but multiple powers clashing over ideology, resources, and empire. And without the painful memory of Versailles, there's less urgency to avoid war. There's no collective sense of never again. The world sleepwalks into a new catastrophe, not with blitzkrieg, but with creeping escalation. Civil wars, proxy battles, regional conflicts that spiral. And when the fighting does ignite, it's bloodier, more chaotic, and far less predictable. Chapter 4: A world without the UN, without Israel, and without a Cold War? The Treaty of Versailles was the precursor to many of the 20th century's defining institutions, including the League of Nations, the UN, and the post-war world order. Without Versailles, we also lose the chain of reactions that it set off. First, no United Nations. In this timeline, there's no global mechanism to prevent wars, mediate conflicts, or push humanitarian goals. Countries act unilaterally or through smaller coalitions. There's no universal declaration of human rights. International law is fractured. Secondly, no Israel, at least not in the form we know. The Treaty of Versailles helped formalize the Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate over Palestine. Without it, the timeline of Jewish migration and British control is altered. Zionism may still rise, but the international recognition process takes a very different shape. Thirdly, no Cold War as we know it. Yes, there is still tension between the capitalist West and the communist East, but without World War II drawing clear lines and the US emerging as a superpower, there is no NATO, no Warsaw Pact. The arms race develops slowly, erratically. Nuclear weapons may still be developed, perhaps even earlier or by more than two powers. But the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, that might never form. Colonialism lingers longer too. Without the war-driven independence movement sparked by World War II, many African and Asian nations remain under European rule well into the late 20th century. Decolonization is slower, bloodier, and less coordinated. And the global economy? No Marshall Plan, no Bretton Woods, no IMF or World Bank in their current forms. The 20th century becomes more fractured economically. Trade blocs are regional, not global. Financial cooperation is inconsistent. In short, the world becomes less ordered, less institutional, more violent, more chaotic. Without the Treaty of Versailles, we dodge one evil, Nazi Germany, but unlock a dozen unpredictable futures instead. No Treaty of Versailles means no humiliation for Germany, but also no structure for peace. We escape Hitler, but not chaos. We trade one warpath for a dozen scattered storms. History shows us that punishing peace can breed monsters, but so can a peace with no plan. In the end, the cost of silence may be just as deadly as the cost of vengeance. Don't let your voice be silenced. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to Alt History Zone for more exciting updates on what could have been. Stay tuned.